welcome back to another episode of Camping Camera. Today it's a hot sunny day in East Tennessee. We're going to go hang out by some water. So let's go. We are here in the Smoky Mountains. This is one of the side roads that you can take if you're going to Cades Cove. This is just past the Smoky Mountains Tremont Institute. But we're going to set up and take some pictures of these cascades. Do a little bit of slow shutter photography. We've got nice overcast skies, so we should be able to get some good light. There's no hard lighting conditions right now. The water is cold. I'm standing in it right now. It's freezing cold, but it's a beautiful day. Okay, we're set up to shoot this cascade. I'm running an ISO of 400. I really would like to shoot this at ISO of 100 for image quality, but the light is so dim, it's going to try to give me a 15-second exposure at my f11 aperture. I want to shoot it at f11 so I'll get the maximum sharpness of the cascades. I could probably shoot it at an f16, but that would really increase my exposure time. It'd push it up to about 30 seconds. So anyway, I'm going to shoot it at an f11, an ISO 400. That's going to give me right around a 4-second exposure. Whenever you're shooting a cascade, anything at a half second or longer, you're probably going to get a pretty good shot. But I'll shoot this one like that, and I'm going to go into mirror lockup mode, and I'm going to be using my trusty remote control. I'm going to do a 10x zoom on the screen, and I'm just going to focus on one of the rocks, probably some of the mossy area on the rocks. And once my focus is set, I'm just going to fire it, remote control. It'll take about 4 seconds. I'll check my histogram. Actually, it chose a 2-second timer this time. So, looking at my histogram, I've just exposed the highlights barely. I'm going to shoot one more, and I'm going to move my exposure compensation about one stop, probably about 2/3 of a stop to the right. That'll increase my shutter speed, or actually it'll decrease my shutter speed. It'll make the exposure a little longer. This time it shot it at 4 seconds, and my histogram looks really good. I'm going to shoot it in f22 because I want to anchor this old mossy covered stump in the foreground. I find that a nice still object in the foreground with some blurry moving objects in the background makes a pretty cool scene. So I'm going to shoot this at an f22. Now that's going to increase my exposure time, so I'm going to bump my ISO up to a 800. And I'm going to focus on something that's about 1/3 of the way into the total scene. That way my front to back focus will be pretty good. So we'll shoot this in mirror lockup with the remote. Whenever you're at a scene taking pictures, you're always probably going to shoot the most interesting object, and I did start out with the waterfall, but if you look around you, there's always other elements that'll catch your eye. You see this old tree that's bent over? You've got the water flowing beside of it. I'm going to frame this shot up with that tree trunk coming in from the bottom left on a diagonal. It gives the scene a little bit of a leading line, and I think that could be a pretty cool composition, so let's shoot this one. What an absolutely amazing day out here shooting some waterfall pics or some cascade pics along this little river in the Great Smoky Mountains. That old cold mountain water sure felt good on this hot day. So hopefully we've got some good shots. We'll go home, put those through Lightroom, maybe do a little editing on those, show you what we're doing, and see what we get. Tennessee. We are back from the Smoky Mountains. Now it's time to edit one of the photos in Lightroom. I want to show you a little bit about my workflow. There's not really a right way or a wrong way to use Lightroom. It really just is a matter of personal preference, but I'm going to show you the way I do it and what works for me. So let's go check it out. Okay, here's one of the photographs from my water shoot up in the Smoky Mountains. The first thing I like to do is go ahead and crop the image to the shape that I want to be. I made a commitment to myself a long time ago that I would not crop a photograph to where it fit a picture frame. I wanted to crop a photograph however the photograph wants me to crop it. This one, looking at the scene, I'm going to start off with a 1:2 format. So I go up here to crop overlay, and I'm going to go down where it says original, and I'm going to change that to a 1:2 format. Now, when I change that to a 1:2 format, I see a little bit of a highlight area up in here. And since your eye is normally drawn to the brightest part of the scene, I really don't want that to be in the scene. So I'm going to pull the image down to where that just disappears. Now, I don't want this rock or this leaf to be in there, so I'm going to crop just shy of that. So let's hit done and see how that composes. That looks pretty good. So let's just go ahead and start there. So the next thing I want to do is check my white balance. Since I shot this in RAW, I have several options available to me. I go to the As Shot button, and I've got automatic, which just barely warmed the scene up a little bit. I have daylight, which kind of gives it an overall green cast. I can click cloudy, shade, and I normally do this just as I'm doing here. I'll try the different ones to see how it looks. Right now I'm kind of switching back and forth between As Shot and automatic. Now I could grab the dropper and find a neutral area of the scene, let's say some neutral area in the water, and click on that and set my white balance that way. And actually I like that pretty good, so let's just go with that. Now the next thing I do is I look at my histogram. I don't want to have too much information all the way up here butted up against the very right hand side, because that means I've lost information by blowing out the highlights. So I'm probably going to pull my exposure down just a wee little bit. Now if you notice, the right side of the screen is a bit brighter than the left side of the screen. Let's go ahead and set a graduated neutral density filter and set it to exposure, and it defaults to -0.57. So I'm going to drag that right to left and try to balance the scene out just a little bit. And actually I'm pretty happy with that amount. So I've balanced the scene. Now I'm going to go down to contrast and just see what that looks like if I bump the contrast up a little bit. I like that pretty good. Now my highlights, there's a highlight slider right here. I normally like to pull that one down. I'll show you why in a moment. I'm going to pull this highlight slider down where you can really start to see some detail in the water. Now the shadows, I'll probably lift the shadows up a little bit just so some of the midtones will come out. On the whites, I'm going to touch the Alt key and click the white slider, and you'll see the screen go black. I'm going to pull it to the right until you see the whites start to be blown out. I'm going to ease those back until they just disappear. And that's where I'm going to set my whites. My blacks, I'm going to hold the Alt key, and I'm going to start pulling it to the left until you see a lot of the dark areas go pure black. Let's try it there. I like that pretty well. Now in a water scene, I find that clarity really helps to make the water pop. And I'm going to do clarity in a couple ways. One, I'm going to bump the clarity to the right here. If you put too much clarity, if I put it up to 100%, you see how a lot of the detail gets kind of wonky looking. You double click it, it brings it back to 0. I'm going to pull just a little bit of clarity. Now, clarity is kind of a multi-purpose slider. Not only will it add clarity to the image, but it'll also brighten things. You need to keep that in mind. Vibrance, for me, I found that bumping the vibrance of a scene up to about 20, let me just type 20 in there.
Seems to be a good starting point for vibrance. So I go walk on down the slider wheel. Now, I told you up there that I wanted to pull the highlights down. That's because there's a highlight slider here. I don't know what you really call it, but I kind of consider it a fine-tuned highlight slider. And I'm going to start pulling that to the right until I really start to see some brightness pop in the water. Now, when I do that, you'll see this little arrow up here turn blue and then white. That means I'm blowing those highlights out. So I'm going to pull that down until it just goes back to gray. And I know that's about as bright as I can push those highlights without losing a lot of detail. Now that I've got those highlights in the water set, I'm actually going to come back up here to my adjustment brush. And I find that in water, I like to bump the clarity up on the water areas only. So I'm going to choose clarity. It defaults on this to 36. I'm going to go ahead and pull a little contrast in there. And I'm going to set the size of my adjustment brush about that big there. Now I'm going to start pulling this over the water areas. And you'll see a little more detail start to pop out in the water. I don't want to do this to all the rocks and everything. I'm just doing this to the water right now. Now the areas at the top of the screen, I'm going to have to pull the toolbar back down in size, start brushing those in, and you'll see a little detail start to pop up. Now another thing I'd like to recommend is if you're going to shoot water, try to shoot it when the water level isn't too high. If the water level is too high, you'll just get a photograph of just a whole bunch of white water. But if your water level is a little low, you'll start seeing those little black and white streaks on the cascades, or especially in a waterfall when you've got, a 10, 15, 20-foot high waterfall. You'll see the individual black and white streaks in the waterfall itself. That really helps to give some definition to that waterfall. Now, while I've got all these areas highlighted, I'm going to go up here and just play with my contrast a little bit just to see how it looks. You see if I go negative contrast, it brightens it up, loses detail. If I give contrast, it almost makes it too dark but adds a lot of detail. So there's a happy medium. And right about there, I kind of like pretty well. Now, when I do this, there's a little bit of a give and take relationship. If you look, I've blown a little bit of my highlights back out up here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit done. I'm going to come back up here to my highlights, fine tune that again. There we go. Now, let's move on down to the colors. You'll see when you use Lightroom for a period of time that there is a lot of yellow and green colors. So in a scene that has this much green in it, I'm going to go ahead and go straight to my yellow toolbar. And let's just play with the luminance a little bit. Here's ultra bright, and here's real dark. Well, I don't really want it to be too dark. So let's make the scene just a little brighter, right about there. And let's go to the green, adjust it down and up. And I see when I adjust it up, you'll start seeing the green on those mossy covered rocks really start to pop. Now, the yellow, let's go back to the yellow again and adjust the hue of it. If I go to the left, it makes it more of an orange yellow. If I go to the right, it makes it just kind of a fake looking green. So I want to add just a little bit of a yellow look because I'm not real wild about leaves that are just super, super bright green. Now that I've done that, let's go to the orange bar. And just to see what items in here are affected by this, let's just grab the luminance slider and go all the way to the bottom and all the way to the top, and you'll see which items get darker and lighter. So I actually like the way it looks when the luminance slider has been slid to the right just a bit. So I'm going to pull that up to about 44. Now, I want those areas to really pop with color, so I'm going to grab the saturation slider and I'm going to pull it to the right, and you'll start to see those areas really warming up. Now, if you want to know exactly how much they warm up, you can always push the backslash key. It'll show you what the image looked like before you started. So there's before and there's after. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to go back up while I'm working on color to the adjustment brush here. There's a couple areas I want to tweak. I'm going to click Adjustment Brush. I'm going to click Highlights, and I'm going to start brushing in some highlights and probably just a touch of clarity on the mossy areas of those rocks. I really want that moss to really pop out. There we go. Now, I'm not trying to go for anything over the top, but I don't know, I do like the way that looks, having that nice glowing moss on those rocks. Now, one area I see that I'm just not real wild about is the color of the green on the top left portion of the screen. It looks a bit washed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my adjustment brush. I'm going to change it to saturation, and it's trying to give me a lot of saturation. I'm going to pull that down to, I don't know, somewhere around 50, and probably put a little contrast in there. I'm going to increase the size of the brush, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make the color and the definition of those leaves in this corner pop just a little bit. Now, if I want to see what that looked like before, I'm just going to go to Edit, Undo Brush. Now let's go back to Edit, Redo Brush, and you can see it really sweetens up the colors over there. So I'm getting real close to being finished here. I'm going to go down to the sharpening toolbar. In a scene like this where there's a lot of rocks and some water, I like to bump the sharpness up just a little bit. I'm going to put it up around 40, and I'm going to go all the way to the right with my mask and push the Alt key, and you'll see the edges of the items are going to be affected by this amount of sharpening. If you start pulling it back to the left, this much of the scene, or this many edges, will be sharpened. So I just want the edges to be sharp. So I'm going to pull it up to about 80. Now, I shot this image at 400 ISO, which is a relatively low ISO, but still I want to put just a wee little bit of noise reduction in there. So I don't know, let's be around 15. There's 14. If I try to get 15, I'll probably overshoot it. Let me just type in 15. 14 would probably be fine. So that takes just a little bit of noise out of the image. Now, one thing that you'll notice is if you use your lens and camera long enough, you're going to get some spots on the inside of the lens or on your sensor. And I see one right down here in the water. While I'm looking at it, I'm going to go ahead and grab my spot removal. And it looks like the size is already set. It'll work good with that. I'm just going to click on it, and it recommends that I sample from this area here to fill that back in with. So I'm going to hit done, and that spot, I don't know, now it's kind of on the bright side. So let's go back and tweak that just a bit. Grab that spot, and I'm going to change the opacity down to about 60 something, and let's try that. All right, so it's kind of a neutral look now. Now, if I really want to fine tune that, I could put an adjustment brush on there. I normally don't do this, but just for the sake of showing, I could put an adjustment brush. I could change it to clarity, and I could adjust the clarity down, and I could just run that over there, and it will soften that effect up, so it's not as noticeable now. Actually, I would probably just do this in Adobe Photoshop, but I don't want to have to switch screens, so I'll just use this toolbar here in Lightroom. So now that I've done the noise reduction, I find that on a scene like this, I like for the viewer to kind of have their eyes funneled towards the middle of the scene. So I'm going to go down to highlight priority, and I'm going to pull that slider to the left. Now, if you pull it too far to the left, it looks like you're looking through a periscope or something. That's not what I'm going for. I just want to pull it slightly to the left. And there's a -10 right there. Now, I don't want the dark edges to come so far into the scene, so I'm going to pull my midpoint to the right just a little bit. And that kind of helps pull your eyes towards the middle of the scene. Now, the last thing I want to do is take one final look at my exposure, because a lot of the changes that I've made can affect your overall exposure value. The image is pretty nice the way it is, and actually it reminds me a lot of how the scene looked, because it was in a really dark gully with just a little bit of light shining in this area. But just for giggles, I'm going to go back over to exposure, and I'm going to bump it up just a little bit. And if it looks like if I bump it up to -12, I start to lose my highlights again. So let's see, pop it back to the left. There we go. So I'm at a minus 0.24. I've retained the detail on my highlights, and we'll call that a final image. Now again, here's the before and after look. Here's the raw image file. Here's the edited image file. So, if you shoot in raw, you have a lot of flexibility to be able to really fine tune that image the way you want to. So, hopefully that'll help you as you experience or experiment with Lightroom. And the techniques that I've showed you here, even though this is just a little cascade area, it'll still work with falling water. From a large waterfall, small waterfall, pretty much water is water. So hopefully this will help you, and thanks for watching.